The very first thing he said, I think about almost every day ever since. He said, you can pretend to care, but you cannot pretend to be there.
Hi, Brandon. Welcome to Owning Your Legacy. I wondered if you could take a minute and introduce yourself to our guests.
Okay, would love to. I'm Brandon Casteel. I'm the Vice President of Partnerships for a company called Spins, based here in the Chicago area, and I'm glad to be here.
So I would love to start our episode by you sharing your story, how you kind of got to where you are today and what were the big important moments that got you here.
I was originally from Dallas. I wasn't born there. I was actually born in Iowa, little known fact.
Interesting.
But grew up in the Dallas area and went to school there and moved to Atlanta not long thereafter. But, had an awesome, loving family growing up. My parents
Big family.
My parents are the best. I have an older sister and a younger brother.
So 3.
Yep. And, my mom's side of the family is this, from New Jersey, Polish immigrants. You have to be at every single event, no matter what.
Yes.
So that was my upbringing, going to the Jersey Shore every summer for 40 plus years. And now my kids kind of see that too. And so I feel very, very fortunate about my upbringing with my family. And
Did you spend the whole summer at the Jersey Shore? Like, how does that work there?
It was always for a minimum of a week. Mm-hmm. But when we were at the age where, my mother was a flight attendant. That was the only job she ever had. And so she had a lot of flexibility as she got more seniority in like how to do her schedule. And so it was not uncommon when I was, from ages 8 to 13 to spend multiple weeks at the Jersey Shore, playing baseball on the beach, eating Zeppelis, eating the original Jersey Mike subs, which is from Point Pleasant Beach, New Jersey.
I did not know that. Those are fantastic.
They're pretty tasty. But, doing the boardwalk thing, and then as you get older, you go to the tiki bar and get 4-shot vodka screwdrivers, the whole progression.
Yes.
So my
Would your dad be able to take that time off too? Did he have the flexibility?
No, but he would go in and out.
Gotcha.
My dad, for most of his life, was a lobbyist for an aerospace company. And it was funny. I didn't understand it at the time. But he would always be like, hey, just tell your friends that you work for your dad works for the company that makes parts for the space shuttle.
Cool.
And like at that time in the 80s, like that was
very cool
the thing, you know? So
yes.
what I didn't realize is like what he was really doing was lobbying on behalf of an aerospace company, but still he was a salesperson his whole life, for all intents and purposes. Even though he had an electrical engineering degree. And then my mom was a flight attendant. That was the only occupation she ever had for her whole career. And back then, there were very specific rules about non-revenue passengers and what they had to wear. And so my siblings and I laugh all the time about how we would be in airports sometimes days at a time wearing like a suit.
Oh, it sounds painful.
Trying to stand by to like go to London, but then we would eventually get there. And it was a really, really cool experience to be able to do that.
Then where'd you end up in after that?
After college, spent time in Dallas and then had the opportunity to move to Atlanta for
work. And where'd you go to college?
Texas A&M.
Oh, of course.
My older sister went there. That was very influential. My younger brother ended up going there. So, we have a lot of Aggies in our family. But had the opportunity to move for work and never in a million years would have thought that I would have done it. Mm-hmm. And we did it. And when we did it, we had two kids and our third was 3 weeks old.
Wow.
Is when we did it. And my wife was so supportive and so amazing during that time because that was my first step into leadership to move to Atlanta. And it was one that was a really great move for a number of reasons, personally and professionally. So really glad that we did it. But I I never, ever, ever thought that I would do it.
That you'd move away from Texas?
And my whole immediate family is still in Dallas, and
Yeah.
my wife's immediate family, for all intents and purposes, all still in the Dallas area. And so it was a big thing to kind of pick up and leave. And then even at that time, not knowing we're going to have 2 other kids after the fact, kind of leaving your support structure.
So tell us more about that role that you moved to Atlanta for.
My first sales leadership role, and God, I will never forget it. My leader at that time, who was one of the more influential leaders that I've ever worked for, sat down for the first time in that office, and he said, "Congratulations, you're going to fire your whole team." And, you know, he saw the color leave my face, and so I started asking him questions, and in that process, you know, was one of the more valuable lessons that I came to figure out on my own. I pushed back, and I said, you got to give me some time here. You know, I 1000% value your opinion. I super trust in you, and I'm super appreciative of the opportunity, but you got to give me some time here to evaluate the team to see what I've got. And then I'm also thinking in the back of my mind, like, a total restart with a brand new team across the board, that's tough, you know, in any scenario, regardless of the product, regardless of how good of a leader that you believe that you are. And at the end of that, that was April. At the end of that year, 2 of those 6 team members that he wanted to get rid of made our award trip that year.
That's fantastic.
And that was and I remember like genuinely crying at our sales kickoff that year and hugging them, just knowing the whole.
And they never knew, I'm sure.
Yeah, they
Never
really
knew.
didn't. They really didn't. But belief is such a strong thing.
Well, belief and probably a lot of really good coaching and holding accountable and, you know, being in the fire with them, I would imagine. I mean, what would you attribute the success of those 2?
Yeah, I mean, you always have these fundamentals that are, you know, what, like you mentioned, accountability, metrics, and doing it in a way that doesn't feel micromanagey, but that is genuinely helpful and developmental in nature. You will always have that. Mm-hmm. Like in any good culture, there's going to have this undertone of accountability and people pushing one another. You'll always have that. I found that the older that I've gotten and the more sales leadership experience that I have, it's this concept of what would this person do if they were at a trade show and they didn't know if anybody was watching? Like, how are they acting professionally when they know that no one's watching them?
Would they even go to the trade show?
Yeah, right. You know,
They show up.
And it's this whole notion of like, do they care? Like, do they genuinely care about what it is that they're trying to do? And that's this whole concept of belief. Like, do you believe what it is that you're doing is being impactful? Because if you do, like, sales karma catches up over time. If you put in the effort and you have the right leader and the developmental infrastructure there, like, it will always reap dividends, always. And so as I've gotten older and had more experience, this is something that I try to look for in like the interview process in vetting out candidates and asking situational questions about what they would do in certain scenarios. And it can be really helpful to understand that dimension, which is, you know, when someone has that belief, like, are they bought in fully? And are they willing to push even if it has no external immediate benefit for them? You know, like they are always going to have that motor and work ethic going regardless of whether they know someone's watching them or not.
And how do you tie that belief, which I love that word, into like relationship building? Like, I don't know, as you were saying that, I was thinking about belief in the relationship, and I love that the term of sales karma will come back. I think that's beautiful. And I think that all somehow ties together, but I don't know if you do, but kind of talk about the relationship aspect of.
I'll go back very briefly. So my dad, when I was just starting off in my professional career, he's like, you got to go to these networking lunches, and I was like, all right, I'll go. And I put my tie on and I go to this networking lunch. And the guy who got up and happened to speak that day, I took a full page of notes, and this was 30 years ago. I still have that page notes, and I still look at it all the time. And one of the very first things that he said, the whole thing was about networking. The whole thing was about relationship building. The very first thing he said, I think about almost every day ever since. He said, you can pretend to care, but you cannot pretend to be there. You cannot pretend to be physically somewhere. Can't do it.
That's true.
And I would argue that in the post-pandemic environment of today, that is more at a premium than it has ever been. Like physically sitting across from someone.
We will never take for granted again.
Yes. And so this is something that like originally I took very much to heart professionally, but as I've gotten older, I take it even more seriously personally. Yeah. It's about taking the red eye to be back to take your girls to school in the morning, or to make their lunch, or to make curriculum night, even if it means having to cut out, at an inopportune time for you. This whole notion of like being there, you cannot put a price tag on it.
I think that's beautiful. And often I wish I had a clone and get exactly what you're saying, because you want to be at two places at once, and both of us having 5 kids, and it's a lot, and big jobs, and wanting to be both places and having to prioritize. I had an instance just recently that a dear friend passed away, and the funeral was on a Friday, and my boys play football on Friday night lights, and there was no way that I could be at both, but I creatively figured out a way to do it. I flew. And I was so pleased with that decision, because I needed and wanted to be there at both.
Yeah. And it's this maddening thing, because there will be times where you will say, you know what, I'm not going to travel this week, and because I've traveled the previous 3 weeks. And then it's this huge meeting with executive leaders, and you're one
and they're
of 3,
wanting you.
Like you're one.
And,
you're
and
one
we
of,
need you, Brandon. We need you.
You're one of 3 people that's joining by Zoom or Teams or what have you. And all you hear is like murmurs of the side conversations, and you're like, what are they saying?
It's the worst. It's not the same as being there, which is your point.
It's never the same. Now, at the same time, technology is ever so much getting us to a place where like it's better than it's ever been. So I'll give you an example. Like my son called me Sunday night, and he was like, Dad, I have this essay due tomorrow, and I have like total writer's block, and I can't. And like, I'm super frustrated, and I don't know what to do. And at that time it was late, it was like 10:30. I was like, okay, buddy, this is what you're gonna do. You're gonna go to bed. You're gonna call me first thing in the morning, and we're gonna work on this together in chunks. Beautiful. It's like, okay. And to his credit, woke up, called me first thing in the morning, and I was like, all right, do you have an outline? We walked through it. And over the course of the day, because I was home and I had the ability to turn my camera off, I was actually stepping off those calls for like 1 minute, 2 minutes at a time, and then doing a FaceTime call with him talking about his essay.
Great.
So that's an example of being there, right?
Yes.
Even though you're not physically there. So I don't want to put too much of a value on like the physical presence piece. It's about just being present, I think, in general. Regardless whether it's through a FaceTime call or through an audio call or even through writing to somebody. It's just this notion of knowing that like you care and that you're taking time and you're making that individual priority.
And how about the concept of I see you? And again, back to either way, either in business and having a team of 6, like you were describing of that team, or your children, of seeing them for who they are. Like, when you have that many kids, because I'm right there with you, like, and I'm sure yours are the same as mine. You have 3 girls and 2 boys, right?
That's right.
And Yeah. And all probably very different, but, and as well as employees. So tell me how you do that of really seeing their authentic gifts.
I think it comes down to being curious. Decades ago, I heard that maybe for the first time, and I didn't understand what that meant. And now I feel very close to that mantra. There's so much fun that is to be obtained from being curious in the everyday.
I've really learned that from doing this podcast. I love hearing people's stories and just being curious about, what struck you in life or what lessons you've learned or experienced. It's been really fun to be curious. And I love the word curious. I think that's perfect.
You're always thinking in the back of your mind, like as a parent, like I don't want to act like I'm being too parenty right now with my line of questioning. That's always kind of there, And if you make sure that you're not going down that path, like you go into some fun subject matter area. And so that's kind of been a nice rule of thumb for me, where it's just like, if I know that my 18-year-old came home late, I don't give him 20 questions about, were you drinking? And, I'm more curious about like, who was there? Did you meet anyone new? Like, was anyone interesting to you? You know, was there any music that you heard that was different? Because, that's a different way to bond with your kids.
So true.
Is talk about music. And so I feel the same way about the professional environment too, where like, it's really easy to get into this surfacey place at the beginning of every Zoom call to where you're like, how was your weekend? What'd you do?
Right.
How's the weather there? Like, it's so easy to stay there. And then like you spend your obligatory 120 seconds there, and then you go right into whatever it is that you wanted to talk about in the first place. I think there's so much more value in, asking a slightly differentiated question. Like, so what are you passionate about right now? Like, what are you guys working on as a family that's like interesting?
Yeah. Especially during the COVID. I mean, as you're describing that, we were all losing our shit. I certainly was. And like multiple times.
Yeah.
Absolutely broke down in tears with my team of just, it was like, so maybe that kind of did teach us all to be a little more maybe vulnerable, more, open about,
for sure,
like what's really going on.
Yeah. But I would say, like, as a principle, like something that's always in the back of my mind is in my personal relationships and my professional relationships, this whole notion of an emotional bank account.
I like that.
And man, it is a sometimes hard introspective exercise to say, how many deposits have I made here versus, withdrawals? And, it's unfortunate, but fortunate all at the same time that people act in their self-interest.
Right.
And, that's a good check to yourself, on a regular basis, is to say, like, what have I done that's kind and purposeful for this relationship lately? And then what have they done for me? And then approach it from a perspective of, you can make unlimited deposits. Don't expect, the ability to pull and withdraw. That same speaker, was like, don't network with somebody when you need only when you need something.
Yeah.
And God, that is so hard to do. Oh my God, that is
that's
hard to do.
That's really important. I remember my dad's partner, he ended up being the executive VP of Edlong, and they were like soulmates, these two men. And I worked for him for a short period of time, and I just had my first baby. And that's like the hardest time. I don't know, 3, 4, 5 months old or whatever. And I was saying something to Henry about my, at the time, husband, like, and he's like, you're talking tit for tat right now. And he's like, don't ever go there in your relationship. Tit for tat is the most dangerous thing in a marriage. And sadly the marriage ended, and it might have been because of dinner chat, and it might have had something to do with it. But as you're saying that, it's like you can't give your time, your energy, your attention wanting in return. It's got to be genuinely to give, right? I think that's what I agree with you. And
yeah,
people can sniff that out if it's you're giving because you want something back.
Yeah, it's and this carries over so directly into the professional world. Like very early on in my career, I heard Jack Welch give a speech about, the young executive that has ambition written on their forehead, and it's just so visible. And I at first was like, I don't know exactly what that means. And the more experience that I have now, I can identify directly with that. It's you can sniff it out. Where
maybe selfish is the word that's
yes,
getting to my mind.
It's this notion of, I am doing this from a very self-centered point of view, and
kind of back to we got to finish the loop because I'm great at taking us all over the place. But so the 6 that you walk in the door and he's like, you're going to fire these 6. And you're like, give me a minute to get to what happened to the other 4 and kind of take us through where that ended.
Yeah.
And we ultimately have to get to how you got to Spins.
There are multiple members of that team that I still keep in touch with.
Even the one you had to terminate.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. When you're a contributor on a team and you're looking at a leader, they know if you're watching out for them.
Yes.
They know if you're genuinely trying to develop them and you're genuinely trying to get them to succeed. And I felt like I had that with all of those members of my original team. And, that evolved over time to where, interestingly enough, I became, and no one would ever tag this on me, but I became the person at my company that put more people on performance improvement plans than anybody else. Like by a lot. And
why did you do that? Like talk to.
So what I did was I totally changed the paradigm of my team. So in so many environments, like a performance improvement plan is like, this is code word for you're going to be terminated. This is the preamble to us formally weeding you out of the organization. And it's unfortunate that that's the case, because what I would say to anyone that I would put on a plan at that time, I would say, like, please look at the semantics of what this is. It is a plan to improve your performance. And that is all that it is.
That's really brilliant, because it's so often hard to put that plan into place. So you were using the system, and funny enough, coming from HR, I bet that, that's built into the system. So let me just use what's already here to come up with a very distinct milestones.
At that time, it was interesting. I had a little bit of internal thrash with our people operations team, where they're just like, are you sure that this is the right approach? Like, you're going to scare everybody. And over time, it was the perfect approach, because when the world knows that you're not playing favorites, everybody elevates their game. Everybody.
True.
So if my best person knew that if they took 3 months off and they knew that they were going to go on a performance review, guess what? They wouldn't take 3 months off. And it made my best people better, and it made my middle performers better, and it even made my lower performers either develop or understand that, like, this wasn't the right environment for them.
Or I don't want to work at this plan.
Exactly. And so, I would tell my teams, I treat everybody the same, and I would say it to their face. And it's one thing to say that. It's another thing to do it.
Yeah.
For the person that's made a ward trip 5 years in a row and has had 2 bad quarters in a row. But if they see that you're really genuinely doing it, like, it totally changes the paradigm of, like, the dynamics of how the team is functioning. Where it's like, we will never take plays off, if you will. And that's just been a principle that's been super helpful for me throughout my career. And I've had people that I've put on performance improvement plans that have left the meeting and said, I feel better coming out of this meeting than even when I came in. And I know that you just put me on a performance improvement plan because I know what needs to happen. I know what needs to occur to get me to a better place.
And it's candor.
Totally.
Which is a very hard thing for some of us, is candor. And that gives you structure to have candor.
Yeah, that was one of the values at the previous organization. That was like our core value, if you will. You know, candor, agility, passion, easy to do business with. But, you know, that candor, that was gold, because the worst thing that you can do to anyone that's on your team is let them live in this land where they don't know where they stand.
That's
You know, if you're sitting there and then you go out with someone who's above you for dinner and you're talking about what you wish that they were doing, but then you're never having that conversation with them to their face, that is the absence of leadership. Like, it is the worst thing you can do to someone is not let them know where they stand. And it's just critical. And even if it's uncomfortable, like, it's just that candor is critical to being more efficient, developing, just being better. And then you have to be vulnerable enough as a leader to ask for and expect the same in return. You know, that's one thing. It's super easy for me to be like, everybody goes on plans, you know, and be this person. But if I'm also coming out of a meeting and the first thing that I ask is like, what could I have done better? You know, was there any part that sounded weird to you? And being vulnerable to the point where like they're actually feeling comfortable and offering that feedback to you, man, that is when you really grow. Because then, you know, everybody's foundation is getting higher and higher and higher over the course of time.
So what's some of the hardest feedback that you've ever heard in terms of your leadership? Has there been any that has been like, ooh, that was a punch in the gut, or as a parent? Could go either way.
No, I have always been a pretty authentic person.
I sense that.
Yeah, in and out of the office. And so where I get into trouble a lot is, I don't believe that this behavior is professional enough, Brandon. You know, I get and then at the same time I have client relationships who are like, oh my God,
thank you for being that way.
Thank you for being that person, and thank you
comfortable.
for being comfortable. And yeah, so it is a catch-22.
Well, my advice to you is keep being you.
Yeah, I mean, I have.
Good.
I have. As I've gotten more experienced, it's you understand what nuances of that can be more slippery than others, you know?
And on the flip side of that, though, what nuances of that can be your superpower?
Absolutely. Yeah.
I want to kind of, there was so I was, you know, reading up and listening to some podcasts on you, and there was one that you were mentioning, kind of that pivotal moment. I'm not sure if it's at this HR company, the HR tech company, I think it maybe was, where you were in negotiations over subscription renewal.
Yeah.
So I'd love you to tell our listeners that story, because I think that kind of ties into candor.
So the abridged version here is we were delivering a software solution that was supplying candidates for a corporation, a large corporation. And we were able to see the actual candidate flow. And so we look at the numbers and we're like, this looks pretty good, you know? So we kind of go into our renewal discussion thinking, I think we're in a good place. And the response was, the candidates that you're sending us are trash, and we don't think that your service is very good, and we're not going to renew. And I remember being in that meeting, being so frustrated, and just thinking to myself, I can't manage a business this way. There's no way that this is sustainable. I'm not going to go into hundreds of these meetings over the course of a year and not know what the outcome's going to be. And so I I searched and thought, like, how can I get to a place where it's a foundation of a partnership that both sides agree upon is the measuring stick. And what that was in this particular case was hiring data. So these corporations, they knew that if they gave you the hiring data, you might gain significant leverage over them. If you were able to prove that you delivered 70% of their hires over the course of the year, you were a very strategic partner to that corporation, and therefore they felt like that's information I want to keep close to the vest.
Gotcha.
And
so did they not know that you knew it?
so a lot of times they would intentionally restrict you from knowing it. So fast forward to 2 years later, and I was the person giving the trainings at my company, like, here's a dozen ways for you to get to hiring data, even if the client is like, you're not allowed to have this. And not that it's a sneaky thing. It's like, it's establishing proof of concept and a foundation that we're both talking the same language. So where these authentic relationships developed over the course of time was, okay, regardless of whether they consented to it or whether I found it by talking to a sales division vice president and he gave me or she gave me, the hires, and then I looked, and then he or she shared their production. And then you said, oh my gosh, not only did we deliver these candidates, but those candidates delivered $5 million in ARR for you this last year.
Wow.
Like, we feel great about it. Like, the dynamic should be like you saying, how do we rinse and repeat this? Not let's push against one another to decide who's paying who for what. Like, so whenever you get to like the
and be paid for value that you're bringing.
That's right. And so it's when that establishment is made, it was amazing how many partnerships said, how far and to the right can we turn this on? And it's a totally different dynamic than coming in and saying, like, this is too much money that we're spending on this. Instead, they're saying, wow, you showed me that these employees over here are delivering this value. These employees over here are delivering this value. Like, what else can you do?
Yeah.
And it just changed everything. And now
Did
that's
it matter
carried forward.
Who you're talking, sorry to interrupt you, but like, I feel like sometimes those kind of conversations, if you were talking to me and it was around Edlong and you were telling me about these hires and these hires made this much productivity, I'd be like, hell yeah.
Yeah.
What else can you do for me? But depending on who you talk to, because we run into this too in our world of, if you're procurement or R&D, for example, it's going to be two different hats they're wearing and different agendas. Maybe that's the right word. So did you find that in that scenario that if you got the right audience and they saw the value you brought, they were easier to negotiate with, easier to partner with is probably even a better word than negotiate.
The largest expansion of a partnership that I ever had, still to this day, the procurement team that I was working with, that conversation was extraordinarily contentious. And I established proof of concept with the sales divisions on proving what hires that we were delivering through, like literally showing the application path. And then that bubbled up and bubbled up and bubbled up. And all of a sudden I'm sitting across from the chief sales officer. And he was the one to say, why are
every hire should be here?
Like literally he's just like, what are we doing? Like, why are we treating you this way? I mean, that's really what he said in so many words, is like, why are we treating you like you're an expense to the business? Like, you are our partner.
And our biggest asset.
We should be absolutely throwing fuel on this fire. Like, we shouldn't be like trying to break you down and restrict what it is that we're trying to do. And what's fun about what it is that I do today is it's still very quantitative, so.
That's great, yes. So you got to tell us more about spins, and I think that's a great segue because it seems like there is a piece of you that is in data. I mean, it sounds like it from wherever you've been that you've used data to tell your story. Mm-hmm. So yes. So tell us first a little bit about what your company does.
Yeah.
And then,
So Spins is a syndicated data company organization. We track point of sale data across hundreds of thousands of brick and mortar grocery stores and e-commerce marketplaces. And so
For example, give us a for example. Because I'm like, I was picking Denise's brain. I'm like, show me some reports we got. Like, I'm a visual. I need to touch and feel what you do.
You know, in the world of flavor houses and ingredient suppliers, they'll partner with us to see what finished goods are scanning across any register that contain my ingredient or contain my flavor. And then they compare, contrast that against their own CRM, and they say, oh my gosh, there are literally hundreds of manufacturers out here that my sales and marketing teams don't even know exist, that are some of the fastest growing products in that category, in that part of the store. Let's make sure we add that to our sales and marketing engine and efforts and outreach,
marketing,
and understanding the addressable market of what to go pursue as partnerships.
Yeah, that's huge. And I was going to say, for example, back to ingredient and flavor suppliers such as Ed Long. So we know I might be in this snack, but we're not in this one. I love seeing, okay, is the one that we're in doing better than the one that we're not? Which one is, performing better in the marketplace? And I think correct me if I'm wrong, but are you one of the few companies that delivers data that way?
Yeah, we're known for adding attributes onto the sales data. So, for example, we just put a certified regenerative organic certification into our data sets. So now you can look and see how are regenerative organic products from an ARP perspective, average retail price, compared to just standard certified organic. And the answer is it's a 69% premium. Like,
okay, now you got to talk about regenerative, because I did learn this on, I think the podcast that you were on. You went deep into regenerative, and I learned a lot from that. So talk about what that means to our listeners so they understand, because I think this is a really cool concept.
It comes down to the way that the soil is treated, in the crops and the commodities that are being grown on that farmland.
And what I learned, too, is it doesn't have to be organic. You can still be regenerative. Just means that you're turning your soil and your crops in the right way.
That is correct.
But you don't have to necessarily go all the way to organic.
That's right.
And
it's
like taking care of the earth.
It's the principles and how it's treated. It's, the lack of pesticides. It's the lack of tilling it as much as, standard farmland is.
So in this example that you just gave, you are in the organic space you're talking though, right? So you're saying if it's regenerative organic, almost 70% more likely to buy, likely to
higher
likely to pay
items.
more. Got it. Okay.
So then you can look and say, okay, fine, something's more expensive, but are the velocities still the same? So I looked at that and I said, okay, let's look at shelf-stable culinary oil. That's kind of a ubiquitous item that everybody kind of gets. And it turns out not only was it a 33% premium for the price, but the velocities were actually higher. And so...
so this matters to consumers.
Absolutely.
At the end of the day, you guys can determine from all your data and what you can add on to what you're looking at, what matters to consumers broadly.
Tracking sustainability certifications, if it's on a lifestyle diet like paleo, keto, Whole30, are there certain ingredients or are there certain natural sweeteners that consumers are responding to more favorably than others?
Tell us what trends you're seeing. One that I did take away, and I think this is probably still true, but nutritional beverages, you said, are just doing really well.
Yeah. Anything in the performance nutrition space is extraordinarily hot right now. Yeah, it's really interesting too, because even though I've exercised for a lot of my life, I didn't start buying protein powder or protein meal replacement things until really the last 18 to 24 months.
What made you start doing, what made the change in you? Was it the data?
No, it wasn't actually. It was, a friend of mine just made a suggestion, so just good old fashioned word of mouth. But now I'm in, I'm a believer. In I did a women's supplements discussion recently, and that's a really fun thing to look at too, because we can see on the labels, what products are positioned to women. And one of the more interesting things that's going on right now is creatine
Cognitive.
Yeah.
That was a takeaway from listening to your podcast too. My mom suffers from dementia. She's 89, and I was like, I might need to look into that one.
Yeah,
and I
use
think
cases.
women suffer more from that, right?
So it's that
it can't hurt.
yes. So it's very fun to be able to look at an ingredient and say, how's that doing across the entire store or in a particular department? Or
Demographics have got to be a big player in your data.
Yeah. Well, everything changes too. 5 years ago, no one was talking about mushrooms, and now we code for 13 different kinds of adaptogenic mushrooms.
Do you sometimes see these trends and go, oh, this is just bullshit?
I like to think about it this way. When you're a data company that's tracking sales data, you play Switzerland. You don't necessarily have an opinion. All you're doing is reporting on what is selling.
True.
And so one of the more fun things that we're doing now is we're looking at social media and more specifically TikTok trends and how it translates into the market.
That's got to be fun.
It is very fun. Well, we'll pay attention to searches on social media, all platforms, but TikTok's getting a lot of views right now, so it's easier to gravitate towards there. And there are some that are clearly showing spikes in sales. Like there was a 777 trend that just came out. It's a probiotic gummy and a probiotic soda. You take one of each of those, you drink the soda, you take the probiotic gummy for 7 days, and you'll lose 7 pounds. So we tracked
Did you try it?
the sales. I have not tried it. I have not tried it. The sales spiked more than 35%. In the weeks, like almost immediately thereafter. And so now it just becomes a question of, does that sustain? Because we all want adoption, but, is it leading to a loyal client who's seen benefit and value in the consumption of the product? Because 2 years ago, we tracked chlorophyll infused water, and that was a huge spike in sales, and now that's really tapered off. Mm-hmm. And so it's all about, is this sustaining?
Do you see anything around, I'm asking for a friend, but around like women-owned diversity? So that's funny because she was saying, WeBank, so that's the Women Business Enterprise National Council. So it's a certification for women-owned businesses, and it's not easy to get. You have to they come and interview and they check your financials and make sure you're for real. Mm-hmm. But that's just one example. But I think Tom's shoes. My kids years ago, I never even knew what Tom's shoes were, but they were mostly it was the girls, the friends or the girlfriends, totally into it because they give back a shoe. Every time you buy a Tom's shoe, they donate a shoe. So I was so impressed with this up and coming generation of really caring about philanthropy or social justice or. Can you see things like that in your data, or is that different?
So most of what we will code for is what we can see on a package.
On the label. Well, you could potentially see.
Now, for now, that's not something that we code for now. However, we do have partners that we marry up our data with data that they might have about the founder of that business. So one of those partners that we have is local here to us right now, KeHE, big distributor, and they track demographic information about founders. And so we will actually take data that they give to us through their diverse trade program, marry that up with our sales data, and you name it, it over indexes. If it's veteran owned, if it's female owned, if it's minority owned, if it's LGBTQ owned, you name it, it over indexes against the categories that they participate in.
I agree. I mean, I'm a consumer. Sadly, I don't, and I need to really, it's just a time thing. I don't go to the grocery store. I'm an Instacart fan.
That's great.
It's time though,
No.
But I miss the days of walking down the aisles because you see those things. And now I kind of just buy the same cart I always buy, and I don't get, and that's not good in my world. I should be walking up and down the aisles every once in a while. But I know that if I see something like that and it's between two, I'll lean that way, no matter what, any of those that you just listed. So we had Teresa Gang. So she owns Sugar Bliss Bakery in the city, and just recently got launched in Walgreens, her products. So literally bakery, and now she's in retail. And on her packaging, she has that woman-owned, and then that profits go to,
Yep.
like
Yeah.
Newman's Own. I've been buying Newman's Own salad dressing for as long as it's because of that. I'm like, and I love it. I mean, you got to love it too.
Yeah.
It's got to be a good product.
This is one of the more interesting things about the world that we live in is we'll look at the ingredient makeup and even the positioning that's on the label. Very specific things that you can derive from looking at the package, like grams of protein per serving, like there's a lot of things that we're coding for. And there's so many companies that will say, well, I have that and this competitor has that and I have that and this competitor has that. Then you'll do like a deeper dive into like a consumer panel engagement where you're going to ask very specific questions about why you buy that product. And a lot of times when it comes back, it's their commitment to community. And that doesn't sometimes overtly show up on a label, so we're not coding for it. So,
and the other thing is you're saying that too, like that just gave me chills, and I love it because that means that people are listening and doing the right thing. But I grew up, and I maybe you did as well, of like, you don't talk about such things. Like you do good, but you don't talk about it. It's a fine balance, right? Of promoting it.
Yeah.
It's not something that I was ever brought up that you promote. But on the flip side, I think we need to because of exactly what you're saying. It's like, if we do good with the money, like my friend Teresa that I was just talking about, like, so she's using her money and her profits for good. Starbucks, like 1% of, like, I love that. And like, so I guess what I'm saying is that I think companies need to promote it so that people that really care can buy with what they care about.
Yeah. And I'm excited about this whole movement towards consumer education by these brands. Like there was a female-owned supplements brand that she was actually still is a PhD, and she got frustrated with the fact when she was looking at data on when they were analyzing sports trauma injuries and rehabilitation, that like all of the participants were like heavily skewed male.
Yeah.
And so she basically made it her mission to educate the consumer population on like, there are physiological differences here on how the body metabolizes these certain supplements. And so that's interesting to me that like that becomes part of the go-to-market. It's the education of understanding why this makeup of this product is different and it's more catered towards this specific individual. That's interesting to me because I think you're going to see that just escalate over the course of time. And that's going to be across the board, whether it's for cognitive purposes or health, any health focus that you can think of. There's just going to be a greater education as to why these products are working or what is the perceived benefit, what is the real benefit. This is what you should see. Like, that's what I'm excited about, is everyone having
cool.
This focus on the education.
And I like the education aspect too, where, I mean, what I've heard or read is not a whole heck of a lot of research done around women's health. Menopause is everyone's clueless. Nobody has an idea. Nobody talks about it. It's just kind of a phenomenon that women deal with. But there's not a lot of whatever alternatives. And I think that's really, and just bringing that to the light and then starting to do more about it. So, Brandon, what is the legacy that you would like to leave behind?
For me, like at its core, it's a very loving one. Like the more that I am around my family and my children, especially, like, I just can't tell you how many times a day I tell my family that I love them. I mean, I want that. And I want, like physical touch and, like, this is so crazy, but like my boys are 20 and 18. And when they come back from college, like they will like snuggle kind of like next to each other on the couch, like with their arms on each other. And that is such a, I don't know why that has become such an important thing to me, but it's just become like the love language like of our family. And so that is definitely something that I think about, like this whole notion of like being really open with your feelings, talking about love, and like this whole physical touch element of it, to where, like last night I was putting my daughter to bed, my 8-year-old, and like she's just always like, "Daddy, snuggle, that's snuggle time," and like we'll just sit there and spoon until she falls asleep. And like those are just moments that I now with the older kids know don't last forever. And so like with the younger kids, it's like that much more of a thing, to where like when it's your last child, like, and one day she'll be 15 and she would never in a million years ask
she
you
will
to snuggle.
Go in for the snuggle even at 15, especially with a daughter. I think that's adorable.
But love is so big, and this whole notion of like vulnerability. I want that so much, and I try to encourage that so much.
Especially in your boys, I think that's huge. There's a lot. There's a book out just recently of just, I feel like with boys, and having boys myself, of it's a different like era of women are successful. So what's the role of men in their lives? But we still need men. Like coming from a woman, I'll tell you, we still need men, and we need good men, and we need partners, and we need vulnerable. And like, I think everything that you're saying is exactly what your boys probably need to hear to be successful young men.
Look, my parents did a lights out job in raising me. But I have conversations with my kids every day that I never in a million years would have thought of having with my parents. It just was a little bit of a different paradigm.
Totally.
And I love it. I love the openness, and I love the comfort level of not feeling that they have to mislead us, and to be open about like when they made a mistake, like that. I want
sexuality. I mean, this generation, I absolutely love the acceptance that they have of each other. Like and also shame. I think that there's a lot less shame in this, even in our parenting, versus what maybe, the generation before us of, I really don't go there. There's like, I will go places, but like I am very cautious and conscious of not shaming.
I want this level of comfort to where everything's out on the table, including the dynamic between like my wife and I, and because we're going to make mistakes, and I want to feel comfortable about having those conversations with my kids, like in front of them. And we do that. And that is, to me, like, that's the most important thing that I can like attempt to carry forward, down the generations, is like just the striving for more authentic self, being present, loving each other, touching each other, being vulnerable with each other. Like that is
real.
That's everything, man.
It's
like
just
nothing
real.
else matters. It's like the City Slickers movie when Curly's like, there's one thing, and like, and you're just like, I know what it is now. It's like, it's that being your authentic self in the family, and like
allowing that allows
that.
your children and your wife too. I mean, you do, it's like a trickle effect, allows everybody to do it.
And then, in my MBA course, this was our final assignment. It was like, it wasn't this exact same framing, but it was just like, write. It literally was like, write about whatever you want to write about. It could be a bucket list. It could be this. It could be that. Just write an essay about whatever it is. And I sat there and I had really thought about it for a very long time, because it's just like, man, I can go back and read this, and like I could be 70 years old and read this. And the more that I thought about it, the more this notion just kept coming up, where it was like, it makes me so happy to bring joy and laughter to others. And this whole notion of like being a host and being like a servant and being like an entertainer. Like to me, there's no better thing that you can do to the world than just to provide that comfort level, that empathy, that entertainment value. You know, you have to be careful because if you go too far, it can be perceived as I'm trying to hoard attention to myself.
Right.
You know, if you're trying to entertain too much. So it's like, it's this whole notion of like, how do I provide warmth and laughter and love in a way that like serves the audience?
I love that.
You know?
And I think sometimes when you were saying that, I was thinking one time, Garrett, my son that played football, it could be a horrible day.
My son's named Garrett, by the way.
You have a Garrett too?
That's my middle name.
I love that name. And my son's named after the road that we grew up on at the cottage.
Oh,
It was
nice.
Garrett Road.
Nice.
That my ex-mother-in-law came up with that, and I'm like, I love that name.
Yeah.
So it could be a potentially horrible day at work, and I'd go to like a Friday night lights game, and he was tight end, and he'd do these one-handed like touchdown. He was like poetry in motion to watch that kid play football, and it would take me away. So I feel like what you're saying when you're like an entertainer, and I love hearing you sing today. And this is a little known fact that you have an amazing voice, and we're gonna hear more of that. But I told him one time, I'm like, sports is entertainment, and it's an escape, a good escape. You know, sometimes you just need an escape. And I think as you're talking, like that is how you be of servant in bringing joy and entertainment to people. It's a break.
Yeah.
And we all need a break. And I think that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being on this. It's been an awesome conversation, and I really love to get to know you more. And
Thank you so much. Really enjoyed my time here, and love the partnership and looking forward to what's to come.